The Amazon is a world that defies comprehension. Vast rivers snake through an endless green sea, and beneath the canopy lies a silence broken only by the hum of life. Insects, birds, the unseen movement of something ancient. For centuries, explorers believed that hidden here, beyond the reach of maps, there were lost cities, forgotten civilizations swallowed by vines and shadows. Among these legends, one name lingers with peculiar weight: Akakor. It first surfaced in the 1970s, when a German journalist published the extraordinary testimony of an Amazonian tribal chief. He claimed that deep in the jungle stood an ancient city, a city not of wood or thatch, but of stone, filled with stairways, towers, and hidden tunnels stretching for miles. A city so old, its builders were said to be not entirely human. At first glance, the story seemed like fantasy, another jungle myth, one more addition to the catalog of explorers' tales that had fueled imagination since the days of conquistadors. But then came the details. Precise accounts of underground passages, maps etched by hand, descriptions of structures no outsider had ever claimed before. And so, Akakor entered the world stage, half mystery, half controversy. Was this the Amazon's Atlantis, the great city explorers had long hunted? Or was it a fabrication, a brilliant invention that tricked scholars, journalists, even governments? The story of Akakor is not just about a city that may or may not exist. It is about our hunger to believe, our fascination with what lies beyond the known, and the dangerous line between myth and deception. And in the heart of this mystery stands one man, Tatunca Nara, the supposed jungle chieftain who guided the world to Akakor and left behind one of the strangest legends of the 20th century. But before we reach him, we must understand why Akakor mattered. Because long before Tatunca appeared, the Amazon was already haunted by the idea of lost cities, whispers of civilizations swallowed whole, and secrets buried where the jungle does not give them back. And so the question remains, was Akakor ever real? Or did it exist only in the stories we tell when the jungle is too vast and silence presses too close? Long before anyone spoke the word Akakor, the Amazon had already become a canvas for imagination. To outsiders, it was not just a forest. It was the last blank space on the map, a green ocean that seemed endless, unknowable. And when something is unknowable, it becomes the perfect hiding place for dreams. The conquistadors were the first to believe there was treasure waiting here. They heard whispers of El Dorado, a city of gold hidden somewhere in the jungle, where kings covered themselves in dusted gold before washing it off in sacred lakes. For centuries, men marched into the rainforest chasing that glittering vision. Most never returned. But gold was not the only lure. In the early 20th century, a British explorer named Percy Fawcett became obsessed with what he called the City of Z, a lost civilization buried deep in the Amazon. He gathered fragments, stories from tribes, odd reports of stone roads, ancient artifacts pulled from riverbanks. To him, it was proof that the Amazon had once cradled advanced societies far beyond what scholars believed. In 1925, Fawcett vanished into the jungle with his son, chasing Z. They never returned. The mystery of his disappearance only added weight to the legend. What had he seen? Had he found Z? Or had the jungle claimed him like so many others before? By the time the 1970s arrived, the Amazon was no longer a frontier of conquistadors, but still a frontier of mysteries. Archaeologists debated whether large civilizations could have existed here at all, given the fragile soil and relentless forest. Most believed it was impossible, that no great cities had stood here, only scattered tribes. And yet, the stories never died. They lingered in campfires, in explorers' journals, in half-forgotten maps. The Amazon was too vast, too silent, too resistant to explanation. If a lost civilization did survive here, who could prove otherwise? It was into this fertile soil of belief that a man named Tatunca Nara stepped forward, carrying a story so detailed, so astonishing, that the world could not help but listen. In 1972, a man walked out of the Brazilian jungle and into history. He called himself Tatunca Nara, and with him, he carried a tale so strange, so layered with detail, that it demanded attention. Tatunka was unlike anyone the German journalists had ever met. His skin was bronzed from the sun, his hair long and unkempt, and his presence carried the weight of something half-truth, half-myth. He claimed he was a chieftain of the Uga Mongolala, a hidden tribe that traced its origins back to a civilization far older than the jungle itself. When asked where he came from, his answer was always the same: Akakor. The way he spoke of it was not with vague mysticism, but with precision. He described towering stone temples swallowed by vines, vast networks of underground tunnels stretching for hundreds of miles, and a history written in chronicles passed down for millennia. To him, Akakor was not a dream. It was a fact. But it was his story, not just the city, that made people listen. Tatunca claimed the Uga Mongolala were no ordinary tribe. According to him, they were descended from gods who came from the sky, who built their cities with knowledge beyond human reach. These gods, he said, had given the people sacred teachings and incredible structures, only to later abandon them, leaving their descendants to guard the ruins. What made his words even more magnetic was timing. By the 1970s, the world was already fascinated by theories of ancient astronauts, fueled by books like Chariots of the Gods by Erich von Däniken. To an audience hungry for proof that ancient aliens had walked the Earth, Tatunca Nara seemed like a messenger. And yet, there was something unsettling about him. Journalists noticed his stories flowed with confidence, but when pressed for details, dates, names, exact locations, his answers blurred. Still, he gave just enough clarity to keep curiosity alive. He spoke of hidden entrances in the Amazon, of sacred markers along rivers, of secret ceremonies that outsiders could never witness. And then came the bombshell. Tatunca claimed that deep beneath Akakor, far below the jungle floor, stretched an underground kingdom, one that had survived untouched for thousands of years. Caverns as vast as cathedrals, stone passages carved with impossible precision, halls filled with relics of a forgotten age. It was no longer just a story of a lost city. It was the promise of an entire hidden world. By now, German journalists were hooked, and among them was one who would give Tatunca Nara's story to the world, a man named Karl Brugger. In 1972, in the Brazilian city of Manaus, a humid, river-crossed gateway to the Amazon, a man appeared who seemed torn from another age. He called himself Tatunca Nara. His very name sounded alien to Brazilian ears, yet it carried a strange weight, as if it had been spoken in stories long before he arrived. Tatunca was an imposing figure. His skin was darkened by years in the sun, his face rough but commanding, his eyes sharp and unwavering. He claimed he was no ordinary traveler, but a chieftain of the Uga Mongolala, a hidden tribe whose roots stretched back not just centuries, but millennia. And the heart of their story lay in one word: Akakor. When questioned, Tatunca didn't describe Akakor as a mythical maybe place hidden in vague shadows. He spoke of it with exactness, as though it were carved into his memory. A stone city deep in the rainforest, with great plazas, temple walls swallowed by vines, and networks of tunnels that ran like veins beneath the earth. His voice carried both authority and mystery. He wasn't spinning a fairy tale. He was making a claim. To him, Akakor wasn't just real. It was a sacred truth. But it was what Tatunca claimed about the origins of his people that sent a ripple through those who heard him. According to him, the Uga Mongulala were not merely descendants of Amazonian tribes. They were the children of sky gods, beings who descended in the distant past, bringing wisdom, technology, and laws. They built vast stone cities, only to abandon them centuries later, leaving their human allies behind to guard the remnants of a golden age. The Uga Mongulala, he said, were the last guardians of this legacy. By the 1970s, the Western world was already captivated by New Age ideas and ancient astronaut theories, thanks to books like Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods. The stage was set for Tatunka's arrival. To some, he was the living proof of what writers had only speculated. And yet, there was unease. Reporters noticed that Tatunka spoke with great conviction, but whenever he was pushed for precise answers, names of rivers, exact entrances, dates carved in stone, his details slipped into ambiguity. He gave just enough to keep the fire burning, but never enough to let anyone find Akakor without him. Then he revealed something even more astonishing. According to Tatunka, Akakor was not merely a ruined city. Beneath the earth stretched a vast, hidden kingdom, cathedrals of stone carved beneath the jungle, tunnels running for hundreds of miles, and relics from an age when gods walked with men. It was more than a city. It was a forbidden world lying in silence below the Amazon. For the few journalists and adventurers who listened, it was irresistible. Here was a man who not only claimed to have seen these wonders, but who insisted he had lived among them. And among the listeners was a man who would change everything, Karl Brugger, a German journalist who believed Tatunka's words deserved to be written for the world. The myth of Akakor was about to leap from whispered legend to international sensation. The Chronicle of Akakor didn't just sit on bookshelves. It lit a fire. Adventurers, explorers, and thrill-seekers from across the world read Karl Brugger's book and felt the pull of something ancient and irresistible, a hidden world waiting to be found. And Tatunca Nara, the self-proclaimed gatekeeper of Akakor, was the man who could lead them there. Among those drawn into his orbit were three figures who would later become wrapped in a mystery as haunting as the city they sought. John Reed, an American, Herbert Wanner, a Swiss man, and Christine Heuser, a young German woman. All three came to the Amazon in search of the impossible. All three believed Tatunka's words, and all three would vanish. The story begins like so many tales of lost expeditions, a promise of discovery, a charismatic guide, and the intoxicating lure of stepping where no outsider had stepped before. Tatunka convinced them that the journey would lead them to Akakor's gates. But first, they had to survive the Amazon's merciless trials. Weeks of hacking through vines that seemed to grow back overnight. Rivers swollen with crocodiles and piranha, hiding dangers beneath every ripple. Swarms of insects that never stopped biting, a constant reminder that the jungle itself was an enemy. Yet the greater danger wasn't the jungle. It was doubt. The deeper they went, the more questions arose. Tatunka's descriptions of Akakor shifted subtly. Sometimes he claimed they were close. Other times he insisted they had to push further. To some, it felt as though the destination always stayed just out of reach, And then, one by one, the expedition members began to vanish. Christine Heuser was the first. Accounts differ. Some say she grew ill and died. Others whisper that she simply disappeared, her body never found. Herbert Wanner vanished next, swallowed by the forest without a trace. Finally, John Reed, who had been documenting the expedition, also disappeared, leaving only fragments of his belongings behind. 3 lives lost, no Akakor found. The disappearances shocked even those who had dismissed Tatunka as a fraud. The Amazon had always been dangerous, but the fact that all 3 vanished under Tatunka's leadership was too chilling to ignore. Some accused Tatunka of murder. Others claimed the jungle itself had taken them, as though it were protecting Akakor, punishing outsiders who dared to search for it. But one detail kept resurfacing, whispered among those who followed the story. Tatunka always returned. No matter how deadly the expedition, no matter how many vanished, he walked out of the forest alive. For some, this was proof of guilt. For others, it was proof of something more unsettling. That perhaps Tatunka truly knew the jungle's secrets, and Akakor's. By the 1980s, the legend of Akakor was no longer just about a hidden city. It had become a story of vanishing explorers, unanswered questions, and a guide whose very identity was slipping into shadow. But the story didn't end there. In fact, it was about to take an even darker turn. When Karl Brugger sat with Tatunca Nara in the humid air of Manaus, he had no idea that he was about to create one of the most controversial books of the century. Brugger was a journalist, skeptical by training, yet intrigued by the sheer boldness of Tatunca's story. Tatunca told him that his people, the Uga Mongolala, possessed written chronicles, carefully preserved for thousands of years. These chronicles, he said, told the history of Akakor in vivid detail, the arrival of the gods, the construction of the cities, and the rise and fall of civilizations hidden from the outside world. According to Tatunka, the chronicles stretched across thousands of years. They described how his ancestors were chosen by sky beings, given knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and laws. These gods, he said, taught the people to carve stone with impossible precision, to build cities that could endure the ages. But the chronicles also told of betrayal and destruction. The gods eventually departed, leaving behind chaos. Some cities were swallowed by jungle, others collapsed into the earth. And Akakor itself, though still standing, was hidden, protected by the guardians who lived on in secret. Brugger was entranced. Tatunka spoke with the certainty of a man repeating sacred scripture, not mere legend. The level of detail he gave was extraordinary. Dates, names of rulers, wars fought, rituals performed. It was a narrative so complete that Brugger began to believe it couldn't possibly be invented on the spot. In 1976, Brugger published the book that would make Akakor famous, the Chronicle of Akakor. The book became an underground sensation. Readers were fascinated by the idea of an entire hidden civilization in the Amazon, one with roots that stretched into the realm of the gods. It played directly into the fascination of the era, a mix of lost world adventure and ancient alien speculation. But the book also sparked a troubling question. How much of this was truth, and how much was fabrication? Tatunca Nara had delivered a story unlike anything the modern world had heard. But could it be verified? Or had the Amazon once again swallowed its secrets too deeply for outsiders to ever uncover? By the mid-1980s, too many bodies were piling up, and too many questions hung unanswered. Tatunca Nara's name was whispered in connection with vanished explorers, broken expeditions, and promises that never materialized. And then, the mask began to slip. Journalists, investigators, and even former companions started digging into his past. Who was this mysterious chieftain who claimed centuries of tribal lineage? The answer was staggering. Tatunca Nara was no indigenous chief. His real name was Gunther Hauck, a German man who had fled Europe, reinventing himself deep in the Amazon. His tribal ancestry? Fabricated. His tales of sacred initiation? Invented. His command of myth? Borrowed from history, stitched together into a tapestry convincing enough to fool Karl Brugger and dozens of others. But this revelation didn't erase the questions. If Tatunka was a fraud, then why did so many explorers risk everything to follow him? Why were his details about Akakor so precise, so vivid, so aligned with certain fragments of ancient lore? The answer might lie in motive. For some, Tatunka was nothing more than a con man who saw in Akakor a perfect tool, a lure irresistible to outsiders who dreamed of discovery. For others, the situation was more complex. What if he had stumbled across half-truths, fragments of indigenous oral history, and built a legend around them? What if Akakor was not pure invention, but a distortion of something that once existed? Even Karl Brugger, the man who gave Tatunka's story to the world, began to question. His last years were filled with doubt, fear, and silence. And then, in 1984, Brugger himself was killed, shot in Rio de Janeiro under circumstances that remain suspicious to this day. A lost city, vanished explorers, a fake chieftain, and a murdered journalist. The Akakor story had moved far beyond myth. It was now a web of deception, tragedy, and unanswered questions. And it left the world wondering. Was Akakor ever real, or had everyone been chasing a phantom? After Tatunca Nara was unmasked, many expected the story of Akakor to die. But legends do not vanish so easily. Instead, the revelations split the narrative in two. One part dismissed Akakor as a fraud, while the other refused to let go of the possibility that some hidden truth still lingered in the jungle. For decades, explorers and writers kept circling back to the same question. Could there be ruins beneath the Amazon canopy that inspired the Akakor myth? Satellite imagery began revealing strange geometric earthworks buried under thick jungle foliage. Massive circles, straight lines, and rectangular formations that hinted at ancient human engineering. Archaeologists uncovered remnants of long-lost Amazonian settlements, some with populations in the tens of thousands. Evidence was mounting that the Amazon was not an untouched wilderness, but the graveyard of forgotten civilizations. Suddenly, Akakor didn't seem so implausible. Yes, Tatunka was a fraud. Yes, he deceived people. But even false messengers can carry fragments of truth. His tales of underground passages, advanced tribes, and vanished cities aligned eerily with discoveries trickling in from archaeology. What if he had simply magnified whispers of a real past? Meanwhile, conspiracy theorists went further. They pointed to Karl Brugger's death and asked whether he had stumbled on something more dangerous than a fake story. Why kill a journalist if Akakor was nothing but invention? Was someone silencing him before he uncovered proof? Others connected the dots between Akakor and a broader tapestry of myths. The Inca legends of underground tunnels stretching for hundreds of miles. The Amazonian stories of white cities swallowed by nature, and even echoes of Plato's Atlantis. The allure of Akakor lived on, not because of Tatunca Nara, but in spite of him. And so the eye of the world turned once again toward the Amazon. The jungle, silent and impenetrable, guarded its secrets as always. Explorers dreamed. Theories multiplied. and the ghost of Akakor lingered, neither fully alive nor entirely dead. It left a haunting question hanging in the air. Was Akakor truly just a con, or the shadow of a city humanity has not yet found? Today, when we speak of Akakor, it exists in a strange twilight space between fact and fiction. On one hand, the story is forever tainted by the lies of Tatunca Nara, a man who deceived explorers, lured them into danger, and left behind a trail of unanswered deaths. On the other hand, something about the legend refuses to die. Why? Perhaps because Akakor is not just about a single city. It is about the human need to believe that there is more than what we see. That beneath the forests, under the rivers, hidden behind the veil of time, entire chapters of our past still lie undiscovered. The Amazon remains one of the least explored regions on Earth. Even today, new ruins and earthworks continue to emerge, showing us that ancient societies thrived here on a scale long dismissed as impossible. Could Akakor be the distorted memory of one such civilization? A fragment of truth wrapped in myth, carried forward through oral traditions and ultimately exploited by a man who knew how to tell a story? Or is Akakor nothing more than smoke and mirrors, a reminder of how easily human imagination can be manipulated, how legends can be born out of ambition and deception? The truth is, we may never know. The jungle guards its secrets, indifferent to human curiosity, and as long as those secrets remain, Akakor will endure, not as a city we can map or excavate, but as a mirror reflecting our greatest desire: to uncover what is hidden, to chase mysteries even when reason tells us not to. In the end, perhaps the greatest power of Akakor lies not in whether it existed, but in the fact that it continues to make us wonder. And so the question lingers, suspended between the leaves and shadows of the Amazon. Was Akakor a lie, a legend, or a truth waiting to be rediscovered?